Welcome to Power Talk, our interview portion. I am extremely excited to be sitting across the desk here from a gentleman who I've respected for many years. His name is Dr. Deepak Chopra. Dr. Chopra has a pretty phenomenal history, and many of you who have been with me throughout the years know how strongly I feel about the power of physiology to shape human emotion, human behavior, and ultimately our destiny. And the choices that we have to make along the way rather than giving the responsibility to somebody else. So to be with Deepak Chopra, I just want you to know this man, I believe, is one of the living masters in being able to teach people the fundamentals of what reality really is, beyond the physical body, what really shapes our lives. So it's really a privilege to be with you, Deepak.
It's a privilege to meet you, Tony. I've admired you for a long time.
Well, thank you. We're here in Lancaster, Massachusetts, and we're at the Ayurvedic Center, Health Center here. And I think maybe what we could do is start out by just giving people a little bit of your background. You have a very traditional medical background, and yet now you're considered by most to be, I think, the foremost expert in the area of understanding mind-body medicine or psychoneuroimmunology. Why don't you give us a little background? Where did the shift happen for you?
The shift happened a while after I had been in practice. I was an academic to start with. I was teaching at Boston University School of Medicine and at Tufts, and for a while at Harvard. And that part was so exciting from an intellectual point of view and so challenging that I was very happy doing that. But when I really started going into practice and seeing patients, I found that the academic intellectual challenges, exciting as they were, really had very little to do with how people got well.
Yes.
I was sitting there spending all my day writing prescriptions, and at the end of the day I would feel that I had been a legal drug pusher, because what was I doing? I was writing prescriptions for tranquilizers, sleeping pills, and antibiotics. If I ever told my patients, listen, maybe if you stop smoking or cut down on your alcohol or changed your weight, perhaps we could wean you off some of these drugs. And they'd say, well, you know, doc, my mother-in-law says the same thing. She doesn't charge me $50. How do I do it? And if you look back, you realize that medicine perhaps has all the answers, but it doesn't have the technologies to make people want to change.
Yes.
Or even if they want to change, doesn't have the technologies to show them how to change.
Yes.
It was very frustrating. So it was my unhappiness that led me out from what I was doing.
Pain drove you to something.
Yes, pain.
So what was the evolution of it then for you? Where did you begin to look? You were born in India, correct?
Right.
And so was your experience, your exposure to Ayurvedic medicine back then, were you going back to your roots? What triggered you to go there for the answers? Or did you start out there?
No, actually I had a background in India, and some of it was a distorted perception of what Ayurveda was. I used to think of it as some kind of folklore or folk medicine. Yes. With a lot of herbology, but nothing more to it. In 1980, I started practicing transcendental meditation. In 1985, I was at a medical conference, and Maharshi was there in Washington. And after the conference, he sort of asked me to come to his room, which I did out of politeness more than anything else, because I wasn't interested in anything that had to do with quote-unquote mysticism.
Yes.
And I found him to be a very practical man. And we talked for a while, and he said to me that I should look, with my background in medicine, I should look into Ayurveda. I was polite enough to say that I would, but I didn't mean to. I left the meeting, and I went to the airport to go home. And at the airport, I met an old friend of mine from medical school, and he handed me a book. He said, this is about Ayurveda. Maybe you find it interesting. So I said, there's some message here.
Yes.
I read the book. It was fascinating. I went back to Maharshi. I said, send me to India. Let me meet all the people who are experts in it. I really want to get into this. And I did.
Wow. Now, at that time, were you the chief of staff at New England?
Yes, I was.
They must have thought you were crazy.
Yes, I was. And initially, the response was, yes, that I was off the wall. My partners didn't know what I was up to. Some of them were even embarrassed about all the things I was engaged in. But I didn't care anymore.
You're on a mission.
I was on the mission, yeah.
Now, what began to make you believe that you really have found some answers here beyond your traditional medical training?
For one thing, I was able to influence people in a way I had never been able to do it. I was able to make them lose weight or stop smoking or give up alcohol, to make them want to be healthy. And then I started seeing some dramatic remissions in illness, in chronic illness. I'd have patients come here, for example, and they'd be taking 15 medicines, about 10 for their problem and 5 for the side effects from the medicines that they were taking. And within a week or two, we'd have them off everything, and they didn't have this problem anymore. They'd have bronchial asthma for 15 years, and now they don't have it anymore. Or they've been taking drugs for arthritis for 10, 15 years, and it's not there anymore. And then when we started seeing occasionally a dramatic remission, and somebody would say cancer, you start thinking, what's really happening here? Are we really, we've missed out on perhaps a few billion years of learning experience, because the human body, as it turns out, is an exquisite pharmacy. It makes every drug that Hoffmann-La Roche makes and more.
Better quality.
Better quality, the right dose, the right target organ. No side effects.
Cheaper.
Cheaper. You have access to it, and all the instructions are there in the packaging.
Yes.
So I said, and it's evolved over billions of years of evolutionary time. All the mistakes, you can make the precise antibody for pneumococcus because some ancestor a few 100,000 years ago perfected that technique, and you have it inside your body.
In your DNA.
In your DNA. So why not use this huge library of information?
So what prevents us from doing that?
Interference.
Social hypnosis?
Yeah, it's the hypnosis of social conditioning. It's violation of basic, simple laws of nature that make our body function. There are simple processes going on in our body all the time. The simple processes are eating, breathing, digestion, metabolism, elimination, and something that controls all of these, and that's consciousness. Thought, at a very fundamental level, non-verbal, not linguistically structured and verbally elite and speaking in the English language with an Indian accent, but at communication,
at a cellular level.
A network of communication, a network of intelligence, communication, and information, which is controlling all these processes. You get in touch with these processes, and you eliminate 95% of all disease. You can even reverse most of disease if you get in touch with these basic life processes. That leaves about 5-6% of disease, which is genetic. But even genetic disease is the stress of our ancestors. If we pay attention to what we're doing in our generation, we'll be doing the next generation a lot of good.
Makes sense. You and I both know from our mutual studies and individual studies that the power of belief to change biochemistry, to change instantaneously the way the body responds to anything. It's that sense of certainty. And some people are trying to pursue it through affirmations and pumping themselves up, but rarely does that really give you the sense of certainty. Whatever we're certain about really in our heart of hearts seems to show up in our body. And I think I read once you said that the body is a printout of our consistent thoughts or our consciousness. Tell me, what is the biggest misconception that we have about the human body? What is the metaphor that we're using that's keeping us locked in where we're always at the effect of rather than understanding we're truly the cause of our experience?
The biggest mistake is that we are steeped in the superstition of materialism. The superstition of materialism says that this world is made up of physical objects in space and time, and if there is such a thing as thought or consciousness, then it's the epiphenomenon of matter. In other words, if I have thoughts and feelings and emotions and desires and instincts and drives and likes and dislikes and passions and hatred, if I believe in God or heaven or hell or salvation or damnation or communism or feminism, all these things occur because there's the dance of molecules in my body. That biochemical reactions somehow produce the epiphenomenon that we call thought. That we are physical machines that have learned how to think. Well, in fact, it's probably the other way around. Not probably, surely the other way around.
I don't think most people in our culture
realize what a placebo is.
I really don't
the
think
word, in fact, of course, the placebo, the word comes from the Latin root, I shall please.
Yes.
But what a placebo is the mechanics of creation. Originally, when placebos were found, they were discovered with analgesics, painkillers.
Yes.
So, and somebody found that if I gave you something which wasn't a painkiller, but you thought it was a painkiller, if I told you, look here, Tony, this is something that's going to kill your pain, and even inside there was nothing, not even sugar, it was biologically inert, then you would make something that would relieve the pain. And in fact, I could give you Narcan, which is a narcotic antagonist, and block the effect of the painkiller. In other words, the conclusion of this was that when you believed you were killing the pain with this drug, your body was making out stuff that was more powerful than any heroin you could buy on the street.
Wow.
Millions, in fact, 40,000 times more powerful than any heroin, as a result of just the idea that this thing really works.
Again, this is not an affirmation. This is not pumping yourself up.
No.
This is not trying to convince yourself.
No.
It's just somebody said, if you wear this garlic, I'll tell you what, you're going to have the pain disappear. You're going to smell so bad, you're going to run away. Exactly. But when people believe that, which means when they feel certain, they send the neurotransmitters out.
They hold this thought to be true. That's it.
That's it.
They hold this thought to be true, then the body sends out this heroin, which is more powerful than anything you can buy on the street. But now, the interesting thing is, I go to somebody else and I give them the same thing, and I say, this is going to get rid of your ulcer. Now, to get rid of the ulcer, you don't make heroin. You can't make a narcotic. You've got to make a very specific molecule. It's called an H2 receptor blocker. It has to interfere with hydrochloric acid binding to the receptors. So it's a very specific chemical. Now I give you the same thing that I gave the other fellow who made heroin out of it. Okay? Now I give him this other person the same thing. He makes an H2 receptor blocker. I go to a third person and he has high blood pressure and I need to lower his blood pressure. And for him, he needs another specific thing, which is called a beta blocker. It's another molecule. And the two couldn't be more dissimilar. He takes the same thing and he makes a beta blocker. Placebos work in cancer. You can go to somebody and you can say, well, this is a very effective chemotherapeutic drug. Not only will the cancer respond, but because they think it's chemotherapy, their hair will start falling out. They'll develop bleeding in the gums, and their platelet counts will also drop. So in each case, what you're doing is you're taking a belief, which is a thought, which you hold to be true, and converting it into a very specific molecule.
A biochemical reality in your body immediately.
Completely different printout.
So in essence, what you're saying then is, if we could just get control of our sense of certainty, that internal notion, as I think you call it, where we actually were the director of it, which we really are anyway. We stop seducing ourselves or allowing others to be the director of our own thoughts. We can create any chemical we need to heal our bodies, and is what I'm hearing you say. Is that true?
Yeah, because we are the makers of our bodies. You go to a deeper level in your awareness and you end up discovering that, in fact, you do create even the molecules of your body in every second of your existence.
Very powerful. Let's talk about nocebos, because just as a belief that something is going to heal your body can cause you to create the chemicals to make yourself healthy, the belief that something is going to destroy your body can create an equal challenge, can it not?
You see, nocebos are the opposite of placebos. And in Australia, for example, there's an Aborigine culture where if you don't like somebody, you can go to the local witch doctor. And the local witch doctor will give you a little stick, and he says, point the stick at the person that you don't like, and that'll take care of him. And so the person goes, takes the stick and points at the person that he doesn't like, and after a while that person starts throwing up, starts having vomiting, and loses their appetite. They get emaciated, and within 1 week they're dead. See the effect of that idea, the word itself. There's an ancient expression, and first there was the word, and the word was made into flesh. Well, in today's scientific terminology, we can say first there was the quantum event, and that was made into the neuropeptide. But the fact is, that impulse of information literally translates into a space-time event. And that space-time event is a molecule in your body. So the word cancer is a nocebo. I say, Mrs. Smith, you have this breast cancer, it's metastasized to your lungs and bones, and you have only 3 months to live. Now, if she is a believer and she's simple, then she'll take that information and translate it into that reality.
When you say she's simple, you mean that she just accepts the doctor as knowing what
She accepts the doctor. She has relinquished her power to the words that come out from her doctor. And
who's a very caring man. And teaching what was taught him.
Yes.
Right.
But see, the statistics, what we call medical statistics, could be collective nocebos.
Yes.
They could be collective nocebos. I have read something in a certain manual, a scientific manual, and the scientific paper says in this particular disease, lung cancer, the mortality is 90% in 6 months. Now, I have no way of knowing when a patient walks into my office in which category he falls or she falls. She could easily be in the 10%. But because I have this statistic which I read, I reinforce it. 90% chances are that you won't recover. Now, the poor fellow has gotten the wrong information because he could easily be in the 10%. In fact, maybe if we all started not employing these statistics,
maybe the percentage would change.
They would change. Yes. Because what the statistics are, a collective nocebo response.
Powerful. Now, I remember you quoted in one of your books a study where they took, I believe it was rats, and they used camphor.
Right.
Why don't you share that study? That was very fascinating.
Well, they took rats and they gave them injections of a chemical called poly-IC, which is an immunostimulant. It stimulates the immune system. And then they had them smell camphor at the same time.
Right.
And after a while, the rats would just smell camphor and stimulate the immune system.
So neurologically, they'd been paired, or those listening, this is simply an anchor, as we call it.
An anchor, as you call it, and neuro-associative condition response.
That's right.
As you would call it.
That's right.
Now, you take another group of rats and you give them something that destroys the immune system and have them smell camphor at the same time. After a while, they'll smell camphor and destroy the immune system. Now, you have two groups of mice or rats. In one group, if you expose them to pneumococci, they get pneumonia and die of it in a few days. If you give them carcinogens, they get cancer and die of it in a few weeks. Nothing happens in the others. The crucial difference between survival and death in these mice is the interpretation of a memory that they have linked to a stimulus.
And again, I think the reason I brought this example up is this is not a conscious memory, as most people think in terms of consciousness, in terms of linguistics or communication. This is a neuroassociation, as we would call it.
Yes, but it's not only a it's a cellular association.
Yes, I understand.
Because the whole body is
at the deepest level.
At the deepest level.
Yeah. Because when I first started doing my work, one of the things I started to experiment with was taking people who had allergies and saying, listen, we've done this anchoring where you change what your nervous system associates to something, or probably more accurately, what your cells associate to something. We've done that with emotions. You think of your boss, and we should have had to condition it now so that instead of feeling this pain and worry or upset or anger or resentment, or automatically now you feel good. You don't have to think about it, it's automatic. Let's try this with your allergy. And I'll never forget, think of a time when you really absolutely felt vital physically, where you could just storm through anything, where you felt like nothing could stop you. And I would create a series of anchors where I could just touch them, for example, and bam, just like the camphor, they felt immediately incredible. They were firing off biochemistry. I wasn't familiar with that level. I just knew what I could see physiologically in terms of their posture and their breathing. Then I'd say, okay, now we're going to bring this, element in. And we did a variety of things, cat hair and so forth. People had those types of responses. We would fire off the anchor, expose them, fire off. Pretty soon, cat hair made them feel great. They weren't sneezing. They didn't have the response. And when I first started telling people about it, they said, oh, this is anecdotal. But what I'm beginning to see now more and more, that this is, as you say, not just neurological, but at a deeper level, this is at a cellular level that we're conditioning ourselves in how to respond.
Yeah, and the cells are nothing other than fields of information. And those fields of information are nothing but self-interpretations. That's all they are. In fact, I'm sure you know of this condition called multiple personality syndrome, where a person may be diabetic and go into a diabetic coma in one personality, and another personality they don't have diabetes, where they have arthritis or something else. So their whole physiology changes. We take the same knowledge that you are talking of in terms of neuroassociative conditioning, and we use things like aromatherapy and condition, for example, a person to respond to the memory of a certain smell and teach them at the same time to slow their heart rate or get rid of the ulcer.
Wow.
So next time they have their ulcer pain, all they have to do is take a little bit of that smell, apply it over their upper lip, and the pain goes away. Or you have hypertension, you just do it and the blood pressure falls.
Wow.
So it's very effective.
That's exciting.
Yes.
Well, as you know, I'm sure olfactory is the most profound in terms of altering state of all the five senses,
Yes.
and it's the deepest, I believe. Doesn't your nose develop before your brain develops as a fetus?
In fact, the nose, the olfactory bulbs are the hypothalamus. They're extensions of the hypothalamus, which is also called the brain's brain.
Yes.
And it controls emotion, memory, autonomic function, which is all the things that are happening spontaneously in the body, or we think they are happening spontaneously. These things, along with memory, are very closely, intimately linked. And behavior, of course, is an outcome of all that.
Of course. Well, I've been working at the grossest level called behavior. You've been working at the cellular level. I'm impressed.
Well, it's the same thing, actually.
Yes, well, they're completely tied. There's no doubt. Well, I remember reading, I thought a nice phrase, I may be paraphrasing it, but you said, nothing happens in the mind, nothing happens without it happening in the body, I believe is what you said, something to that level. And I think most people just don't realize that when they let themselves just go behaviorally, or let themselves just go emotionally, that they're really letting themselves go biochemically.
Right. See, the thing is, we still have this idea that the mind and the body are two different things, but they're not.
Yes.
The body is a mind. In fact, the new terminology is body-mind.
Right.
And the body at a cellular level, go beyond the cells, you end up with molecules. Go a little beyond the molecules, you end up with atoms. You see, these atoms aren't material objects, they're particles. And the particles aren't material objects either. They're fluctuations of energy and information in a huge void of energy and information. So you get to so far beyond the facade of molecules, and you start ending up with a cloud of nothing. And you go beyond that cloud of nothing, and then you're left with absolutely nothing. But this absolutely nothing is the essential.
That's what the something is.
The essential raw material of the universe is non-material. The essential stuff of the universe is non-stuff, but it's not just non-stuff, it's thinking non-stuff. Because out of its own nature, it creates everything.
Well, people listen to us right now and hear this conversation, and some people, I think, will go into a deep trance and go, what was he talking about?
Well, maybe they'll get out of their trance.
Yeah, maybe they will. Maybe it'll wake up the trance. But I think we have to be able to stretch people's perceptions. Let's talk about something people are probably equally afraid of, or at least society is right now. Let's talk about AIDS. You look at AIDS, and the majority of people in the population see this as something that if they were to all of a sudden take a blood test, which, as you and I both know, does not test whether they even have an AIDS virus. It tests whether or not they've had antibodies that have been linked to that.
It's a nocebo.
Exactly. But we're talking about a situation now in our culture where it's being promoted as the plague that's going to destroy our society. It's begun to cause people to link to the act of making love with somebody they care about. Could be something that could kill them. This is what children are beginning to learn. I interviewed Dr. Duesberg. I don't know if you're familiar with him, from UC Berkeley. And he, as you know, is one of the co-discoverers of inconogens. And he said that HIV is not the source of AIDS. He's attacking all over the country, and he's pretty well qualified to do so.
Yeah, HIV is maybe a precipitating agent in a susceptible host. The material agent is never the cause of the disease. It may be the final factor in inducing the full-blown syndrome in somebody who's already susceptible.
But what made them susceptible?
Their own interpretations of the whole reality that they're participating in.
Could that be translated into their thoughts, their feelings, their beliefs, their lifestyle?
Absolutely.
It's not just as simple as
In fact, we have a lot of patients, I have a lot of patients with so-called AIDS, this label that we've given them, that are healthier than most of the population that's living in downtown Boston. They haven't had a cold in 10 years.
Yes, but somebody's told them they have this disease.
Somebody's told them.
And they've bought into it in some cases.
Yeah, and the label is not the disease. The test is not the disease.
Well, talking to Duesberg, he said that physiologically, biochemically, all the HIV virus could ever do, or has ever been proven to do, is wipe out 1 out of every, I think it was 10,000 T helper cells.
That's right.
And how often are we being able to
facilitating that process through our own thoughts, beliefs, emotions, ideas, and interpretations?
From what he told me, we replace more of that in a day than they could ever be destroyed.
Absolutely
and that's what he's promoting all over the country. Yet we've got a test out there that doesn't even test for the virus, that couldn't wipe out that many cells in the first place.
Right.
And people are accepting this, and when they accept it, what happens to them?
Well, when they accept it, then they make it happen. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Maybe they go take something like AZT, a side effect of which is immune suppression.
Also, yes. I mean, the implications of this are enormous, mind-boggling, and frightening.
Well, this kind of conversation, some people can listen to it. I'm sure even some people in the medical profession say, these guys are off their rock, or they could say that about me. It'd be pretty hard about you, although I'm sure they could push it.
Yeah.
What keeps us locked into this trap? What keeps us locked in this trap where we keep promoting a philosophy of fear where we must depend upon something or someone outside of ourselves to keep ourselves healthy?
It's a collective belief system. It's the hypnosis of social conditioning. It's cultural, religious, social indoctrination. And it's a trap, as you said. It's a real trap because usually when you're in a prison, you can at least see the bars. In this case, you can't even see the bars. Psychologists call this phenomenon premature cognitive commitment. Because you make it prematurely, it's not true. Cognitive, because it shapes your perceptual reality, so you hold it to be true. And commitment, you're locked into it.
So what's the way out of the trap? Awareness?
Yeah, ultimately unbounded awareness, so that you realize that you are the field of all possibilities, that you have the ability to create anything. It's really that you are the magician behind the trick, that you are the creator behind the creation, to curve back within myself and keep creating, to know that you have to expand your awareness, yes.
What would you say to somebody like, my personal belief and my experience, rightly or wrongly, that I've seen through time, is that probably the greatest tool of influence is what I call social proof. That is, when people are uncertain as to what to do, they look around to see what other people are doing to decide. And we look around our society and we see a very unhealthy population. We see a population where 1 in 2 people are dying of heart disease, 1 in 3 are getting cancer. Certainly there are certain lifestyles that people have adopted that have made that happen, both physiologically, dietary, exercise, stress, thought process, all of these things together, a lack of happiness. But we see this being propagated, I think, by examples of people that influence us. We look at a person like Magic Johnson, phenomenal ball player, young man. He had no symptoms at all. He went to go get a life insurance policy, which is part of what he's doing to protect his financial background, and he takes a test. A test that I was just reading in the Congress Office of Technology Assessment. Dr. Larry Mike says that 9 in 10 times the test where it says you got a positive finding is wrong if you're a heterosexual. By the way, they say it's 10% of the time it's wrong if it says that you're okay and you're homosexual. I can't quite figure those statistics out, but here we've got a situation where he feels fine.
If he is in fact a heterosexual, and I think he is,
yes,
then the statistical likelihood of that is almost of his having the disease,
yes,
is just impossible, almost impossible. If you knew how difficult,
yes,
it is for this virus to infect a male in the situations that we're talking about,
yes,
it just doesn't make any sense at all. And the test is, it's just
a Western blot test.
Yeah, it's a test. It could be false positive. In fact, most of them are.
What's interesting, though, is people's whole lives are then altered the minute they have this test.
Yeah, it's our collective consciousness and how it interprets reality. It then creates that reality. A collective consciousness influences. I'm sure you're familiar with the 100th monkey response and how if a certain...
Clarify it, though, so people know what we're talking about.
Well, this very fascinating...
What island was that in?
It was one of the Japanese islands, a small Japanese island, where they introduced sweet potatoes into a monkey population. And the monkey population is unable to swallow these potatoes because they're mixed with sand and grit. And it takes about 6 months, and then in the first time it happened, one young monkey figured out that if you could take the potato and wash it in a stream of water, you could eat it.
Yes.
So immediately some of the younger monkeys started following this potato washing technique, but some of the older ones had to wait and see if this was a new cult or something that had sprung up in the monkey population. In any case, once you reach a certain threshold, and it's not very much, it's 1% or so of the population that's practicing this particular potato washing technique. Then if you cross that threshold, then suddenly the whole behavior of the entire population changes.
And this was on other islands as well, true?
Other islands. So
where there was no communication between the monkeys where they could be modeling each other visually.
Absolutely. So 99 is a metaphor. The 100th monkey joins the force, and then suddenly, because a certain threshold has been reached, everybody believes that that's true.
And we see that in science. We even see that at the level of fashion.
Yes.
You know, and not only where people are seeing it because the media is exposing it, but where things will just spring up in different parts of the world where there has not been any communication. Different scientists all of a sudden have the same breakthrough who have not been talking to each other.
In fact, I think it's the mechanics of evolution. We are reaching a stage where Jonas Salk said, we've finished with biological evolution. We're in the midst of metabiological evolution, which means the evolution of consciousness. And ultimately, of course, the evolution of consciousness of consciousness. So we are at a stage where ideas are becoming the evolutionary force rather than genes.
Yes.
Genes were packets of information, but they've done their job. Now ideas become the memes. The word is memes because memory and memes. The word is memes. These are non-material space-time events that are going to shape the evolution of what happens to humanity. It's our collective thinking. Now, I was at the Berlin Wall when it fell down. I happened to be in East Berlin, and everybody was celebrating that day. The divisions between East Germany and West Germany had fallen. Communism had gone. There was a big neon sign with Karl Marx underneath the statement, "Sorry, chaps, it was just an idea."
Oh, I love it. But human beings, out of their need, I think, for a sense of certainty, my personal belief is, I think you know from exposure to my work, is that everything that drives human behavior at some level is the need to avoid pain, the desire for pleasure, at least at the level of behavior. And human beings seem so committed to being able to avoid pain at any cost that they'll endeavor to, maybe not endeavor, but they're willing to maintain the pain that they've got because at least they understand it and have some way of dealing with it rather than trying to deal with the unknown. And I see so often where someone, and I'm sure you've seen this, where someone would rather have a label for their current, dysfunction in their body that almost they get excited about. They're excited to know now that they have this disease. Have you seen this experience?
I've seen it. It's such a tragedy. In Vedic tradition, we have a saying, you need freedom. And you need freedom from the known. The known is what you need to be free of because the known is the rigid patterns of past conditioning. The known is the trap. What you do need to do, if you want to be free, step into the unknown in every second of your life, and then you'll be free. And then create from that unknown, because the unknown is the field of all possibilities. It's everything.
But for most people, the unknown is the field of fear. For most people, what the unknown means is I could get hurt. And most people are not willing to take that jump.
They
the majority
should be
of people.
fearful, if anything, only from the known, because that's what the trap is.
I would agree with you.
The trap is the known, not the unknown. The unknown is all choices.
I would agree with you. Let me bring you back to AIDS one more time. My focus on it is only because it's in the headlines every day, and I think it's a great metaphor. Going back to somebody like a Magic Johnson, they convinced him, of course, to take AZT, which,
Horrible travesty.
What does AZT do to the body?
AZTs will destroy the immune system even more. And in fact, it causes all kinds of side effects. And there are statistics now that show beyond a shadow of doubt that AZT does nothing to the long-term morbidity or mortality of the disease.
In the very beginning, it was passed after only being used for, was it 3 or 4 months initially?
Wow.
It was like, tossing a coin for a short period of time.
There's a lot of money involved in all this.
This is true. Also, I read recently that in terms of AIDS that I was reading an article and they were talking about that if you've ever had any kind of shot that had gamma globulin in it, that you will come up very easily. You can come up with...
Oh, lots of false positives.
Yes.
False, not just gamma globulin. There are all kinds of antigens that are out there in the environment that can induce a false positive. In fact, I have a person, which I will not identify right now, who has held the world record for swimming and continues to hold it periodically, who has the same positive test but doesn't have the disease.
Now, in the very beginning, they said, this was what always fascinated me. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't know of any disease where if you have the antibodies, it means you have the disease up until AIDS. I mean, the fact that you have antibodies should be showing that the body is doing its job, should it not?
All it means is that you've been exposed to an antigen.
Yes.
That's it. And in this case, we don't even know if the antigen is the
cause of such a syndrome.
Or you see, HIV is one particular antigen.
Right.
There are thousands of antigens that have the same structure, can elicit the same antibody response.
Interesting. Well, also the symptoms of AIDS, I believe there's 167 diseases that have the same symptoms, and they keep expanding the definition.
Yeah, they keep expanding. I think we're creating a monster collectively.
Well, the biggest monster I see is the fear, because fear, I think I read you had a wonderful definition of stress. Because I think you were talking about aging, which I want to come to, but not yet. But you had a great definition. You said, I believe, that stress is really not based upon what's happening in the environment. It's our interpretation of threat. Is that correct?
It's our interpretation of physical or psychological threat. It's not in us. It's not in the environment. It's in our interpretation of what we think is happening to us. And a good, Dr. Ken Pelletier, I believe, many years ago gave the analogy. He said, compare it to the waves on an ocean. If you're a skillful surfer, then every wave is joy and exhilaration.
Exciting, sure.
It's exhilaration.
Yes. And you're creating the appropriate biochemicals that come with that.
That come with that. On the other hand, if you're not prepared, then the first wave is a disaster.
Yeah.
So the same stimulus can be either threatening or stressful, or the same stimulus can be joyful, exhilarating, energizing, bliss.
So again, when we come back to what is the solution, it appears that to constantly expose yourself and seek the unknown, to constantly pursue what I would probably call profound knowledge, that is information that helps you to understand and interpret in a broader and a deeper sense the quality of your world.
And something that you do very effectively, and that is learn how to perceive your interpretations. Learn how to, you do it very effectively. You show people that, you're locked into this reality because you made a certain neuro-associated conditioned response.
Yes.
Okay, but that's all it is. Now we'll replace this neuro-associative conditioned response with this other neuro-associative conditioned response. That's very effective. To give people the insight that what's happening to them is a result of certain interpretations and certain memories that they've been locked into it.
Yes.
Now we change that. And then there's a deeper level of reality. And this, I feel, is very important, to get in touch with that aspect of yourself, which is not subject to change. We've spoken about the body, we've spoken about the mind, but there's something which is more primordial to both the body and the mind, and that is the spirit.
Yes.
I am the experiencer, not the experience, even though, of course, I get locked into these experiences, but in every experience, there is a part of me that is still unchanged. Yes. It's the experiencer. If I can find the experiencer in the midst of every experience and get in touch with that experiencer, I'll discover that the experiencer, the original experiencer, is just a silent witness that never changes. It's that non-changing part of myself.
And that's the part of you that's without fear.
That's part of you that's without fear, because all fear ultimately is the fear of change. It's the fear of mortality. And that part of you is immortal. It doesn't know any kind of change. It's absolute.
Well, it's interesting if, what we're really saying is that consciousness really is what shapes all forms of destiny, physical, emotional, psychological, spiritual.
Yes.
And in essence, if we choose to finally realize that we can direct that consciousness, that we can direct everything we experience in life.
Yes, consciousness is a field of all possibilities. It's pure potentiality. Einstein defined the field when he was talking in terms of space-time, field matter analogies. He said, in the new reality, in the new physics, there's no place for both matter and the field. The field is the only reality. And the field, instead of being an actual model for space-time events, It's the continuum of all possible states of energy and information that subsequently manifest as space-time events. And I am the field.
When you say you're speaking of the unified field, or are you speaking
yes,
of what people call the unified field?
Yes, I'm speaking of the unified field. In my, all of matter ultimately boils down to force fields, and these force fields are also information fields.
Yes.
Ultimately, they come from the field, which is one unified field from where everything comes. And my base